So can you give us any example of how you've had to, balance the terms of the lease, maybe when they're broken, the rent's not being paid, and providing that quality customer service, as opposed to like getting angry at the tenants or maybe doing something rash. How do you balance that customer service with enforcing the terms?
I think it all comes to expectations up front with both our client and the tenant, and setting those expectations pretty clearly, and it makes those conversations a lot easier. So when we move tenants into a property, I suggest everyone do this. It's more than just a lease signing, a move-in inspection, and here's the keys and I'm on my way. It's taking the time to really sit down, read through the important aspects of the lease, such as, okay, here's your rent amount, here's when it's due, here's the grace period if there is any, here's the late fees, and you know what, I hate to do it, but when you pay your rent late, like, we're going to enforce this because we're running a business over here, and so just know up front, if your rent's late, this is the conversation we're going to have, and here's what happens. Here's how you make a maintenance request. Here's how you can call me. Here's what to expect when that happens. It's not going to be fixed likely the same afternoon. Unless it's an emergency, it takes a day or two to get a vendor to your property. So anyway, setting those expectations, what's the tenant's responsibilities inside of the lease, like changing light bulbs or smoke detector batteries or furnace filters or whatever it might be. And what are my responsibilities as a property manager or a landlord to you? And just have that conversation. It takes 10 minutes. And that way, when it does come up and they're annoyed about something because you're enforcing that late fee or you're calling them and asking where the rent is, like, hey, remember that conversation we had back? You agreed to this. I'm not trying to be a bad guy, but we've got a business to run, and I've got to be able to, make my payments just like you have to make your payments. And so how do we rectify this? How do we bring it together? And so I think it's expectation settings up front, and then just knowing that you can't take it personal, right? You never know what's happening. It's like any conversation, right? Or any interaction you have with humans every day. You never know what else is going on in that person's life. And so if they're calling you frustrated because they can't pay their rent, and you're like, why are they mad at me? It's not my fault, right? There's probably a lot of other stuff going on. And so having those conversations and trying to be compassionate and empathetic towards what's going on and saying, hey, I'm trying to run a business, and so I need that rent to come in. But okay, you can't pay it today. It's late. Like, what can you do? And if you haven't had an issue with the tenant in the past, that's often the best route to go and say, okay, like, let's work it out. Okay, you can pay half now and half in a week. If you miss it, I'm never going to give you another chance again because I'll take your word now that you're going to make that payment. But if you don't, we're probably not going to have arrangements like this moving forward. And if they fulfill their obligation, great, everyone's happy. If they don't, then you got to take the conversation to the next step. But you've done, I think, at that point what you can to give that customer service and be empathetic with what's happening in that person's life. And again, oftentimes, if you do that and a tenant gets back on track, they're on track for a long time, and maybe a year from now the same thing happens, but you probably have a little bit more hope that that they'll come through on what they're saying. A quick example about that, frankly, at Renters Warehouse, we're pretty, I don't know if militaristic is the right word, but we're very rigid in the fact that we're managing these properties for other people, and it's not our money to be playing with and giving away and extending deadlines. So we'll have conversations with the property owner if we are going to have to make a payment plan with a tenant or extend something and it's pretty much like a you pay or you're out situation in most cases, because that's our business, is ensuring that we're taking care of our property owners. But like being a plumber and how your house always leaks if you're a plumber because you're not fixing it, I have some personal properties that I used to be pretty hands-on managing, not as much anymore. And I had a tenant that he was going through a divorce. His wife was leaving him. He was trying to find a roommate. He wanted to stay in the house, couldn't come up with enough rent to pay. And kind of said, hey, if you, can I pay half this month? And I don't know when I'm going to be able to pay the other half, but I'll try and add it to the rent check and build it up over time, et cetera. And against my better judgment, I said, okay, that's fine. It ended up working out great. He made his half month's rent payment. He paid on time the next month. I think he sent like $50 extra. Next month, he didn't really pay anything. Next month, he paid an extra $100 kind of thing. And long and the short of the story is, 5 or 6 months later, I got a check from him for the remaining $400 he owed me, and a note that said, "Hey, thanks so much for helping me out. My wife and I are back together. She's moved back in, and like all is great with life, and could have done without you." And so that was one of those situations where sometimes it does help to try and be flexible. But again, we don't have that much flexibility with our clients. But for people who are managing their homes themselves, if you are in a situation where you can be maybe a little more generous than I would even recommend you be, like that story, sometimes it works out really, really well. And so I think it's like human nature. You got to find the balance.
Yep. You've touched on a lot of great things there. Number one, setting expectations. Number two, realizing that your tenants are people too. They have different scenarios that are going on in their lives, and you don't know what's going on in their life,
Right.
So, and number three, not taking things personally, because I think as property managers, speaking as an ex-property manager,
recovering property manager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can just kind of build up, and it can all, eventually it can feel like, the world's out to get you, but you just have to build some thick skin there.
Right. Absolutely.
So, want to hear more on this topic? Click the link below for the full episode of Maximizing Your Property Value.